Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is July 6, 2025, Sunday, July 6, 2025. I hope everybody had a good 4th of July. Happy Independence Day. Let's get off to our first story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. And this is titled The Jockey's Ghost. And it's 1885. All right. And this is a ghost story that's rooted in Long Island history. It made all the newspapers. And it started a few years before, back in 1866. And this is when a horse trainer was mysteriously killed at Centerville Course. And the Centerville Course was a well-known horse racetrack. On October 1st, 1866, a celebrated trainer was shot at the Centerville Course. His name was Robert Walker, and he'd gone out to exercise his horse. He was also the owner of a hotel and stable close to the race course. The horse returned with an empty sulky, and Walker's servant went to look for him. There he met Leonard Brown, who told him he just found Walker's body lying on the track. He was still warm, and blood spurted from a wound to his left temple. Dr. Belden from Jamaica examined the body and found a small pistol ball inside the dead man's cranium. A man working at the track told the coroner that about the time of the murder, he saw two men dressed in dark clothes running from where the body was found. Walker's death came soon after the murders of two horse people in Chicago. First, the owner of a racehorse was shot dead by his mistress. A few days later, at the same place, a driver by the name of McKeever was found dead, supposedly murdered. One of the theories for Walker's murder was a business deal gone bad. He lent a large sum of money to a friend in New York as the security of certain oil stocks, which were found to be worthless. They had a violent quarrel, and Walker threatened to expose him. The man said, "You shall rue this as long as you live, and that won't be long." A second suspect was a man named Alfred, recently employed in Walker's stable to look after a horse belonging to Mr. Bowles from New York. Mr. Bowles fired the man after Walker told him about his illicit affairs with the servant girls around the hotel. Another theory for the motive was connected to Walker's skill as a driver. Perhaps he was killed to prevent him from participating in recently announced races on the Union Course. Robbery seemed not to be the aim of the crime, since $102 in greenbacks were found in Robert Walker's vest pocket, along with his gold watch. There were no footprints around the soft earth where the body had fallen. On October 9th, 1866, Robert Martin was arrested on suspicion of being the murderer of Robert Walker. He was formerly a hostler in Walker's stable. Martin, who was supposed to be somewhere else, within a few minutes of Walker's death, came to the hotel, ordered breakfast, which he didn't eat, and left to deliver a horse to Newton, New Jersey. He acted very nervously. He stopped at John Snedeker's and said Walker was dead after being kicked by a horse. At this moment, he had not seen the body or known of the man's death, which intrigued the detectives who eventually arrested him. Martin had a very bad reputation, and everyone appeared to be afraid of him. In a strange twist, Coroner Curtis thought to let him go on a $500 bond for his appearance. On October 15th, the inquest held into the murder concluded that evidence was deemed insufficient to justify the detention of suspected parties. The murder was never solved. Could this be the reason the ghost haunted the race course? This was the ghost story told, quote, "After a rest of 5 years on the Centerville race course just south of Woodhaven, men and women congregate every night to witness the strange sight. His ghost appears promptly at 9:45 and departs at 12 minutes after 11. There is a good deal of speculation as to whose ghost this is. Two murders on the racetrack, from bloody chapters in its history and public opinion, argues that this spectral visitor is the troubled ghost of the murderer of one or the other of the slain. It is also the belief that when the ghost was in the flesh, its avocation was that of a horse jockey, and as the man last murdered on the race course was thought to have been killed by a rival jockey, some persons who lived in the neighborhood at the time think they can solve the mystery in which the crime remains shrouded. The ghost is the first visible in the vicinity of the stables of the old Centerville Hotel. It is recalled that the rival jockeys quartered their stock in adjacent stables on this property. From the stable, the specter proceeds by the highway to the southward point, where a hotel formerly stood in front of the entrance to the racetrack. Here he halts for some minutes, just as the jockeys used to do, for they always took a drink before exercising. There's a dispute whether the ghost wears a robe of white or a garment more the color of sheep's wool. But on one point there is no disagreement. The ghost spits fire like a foundry chimney and leaves a sulphurous odor behind it. On this fact is based a most animated discussion as to whether the origin of the ghost is in bliss of a state of torment. The majority hold the latter theory, and a few think it may be a spirit sent to earth to do penance. The ghost never touches terra firma. It moves along through space like a feather in the wind, going on a zigzag course. At regular intervals, it spits fire. Scores of persons have followed in its wake without getting close enough for personal contact, and all declare that when the ghost comes to a stop, it invariably says, "Whoa!" From the drinking place, the spirit moves in on the race course, apparently waiting for the word to dart away from where the wire used to be, going round the mile track at so terrific a gait that some persons argue it must be the ghost of Flora Temple, raced in the 1850s, or Lady Suffolk, raced in the 1840s. But those who hold to the theory that it is the ghost of one of the departed jockeys affirm that they can distinctly hear the hallooing and whistling of the whips, so familiar to old track habitués. After every heat comes the scoring exercise, and 3 heats are invariably run. After this, the ghost waltzes out into the highway, stops again at the old familiar barroom, and goes zigzagging along to the stables, into which it disappears seemingly. But there are those who claim that the ghost passes on to the Bayside Cemetery and into its grave. The keeper at this Hebrew burial ground laughs at the credulity of the people. Nobody is ever buried there near enough to the surface to enable a ghost to rise up, the keeper says. But he has a suspicion that at some time, near or remote, some person has been murdered and buried in the old stable. He thinks it is the spirit of some woman who takes to the racetrack in pursuit of her slayer. Some of the Catholic residents who believe firmly in ghosts and declare that they often converse with spirits in Ireland are quite alarmed at this apparition, because it is in no particular like the friendly Irish ghosts. Nearly 50 persons watched the fiery-tongued visitor for more than an hour last night. Let me tell you something. This is a great ghost story, as I've never heard of one where it spits out fire. That's that's a great story. All right. I get the part where it's reenacting its regular whatever it would do in life, but that thing of it's then going and spits out fire, that's fantastic. And apparently this was witnessed by a bunch of people. So there you go. Next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, is titled The Mother of All Liars. In January 1959, Larry Lord Motherwell, age 42, former felon and construction worker, went on a 10-day spending spree in Las Vegas. Perhaps a premonition tickled his spine that the proverbial ton of bricks was about to descend on him. It started with an arrest by Las Vegas police for failure to register as a former felon and being a fugitive from Maryland in connection to a homicide investigation. They wanted to question him about the death of an infant girl buried in a Frederick, Maryland pet cemetery. The warrant dated back to June 1954. When apprehended, Motherwell was driving a new station wagon, had $1,800 cash in his pocket, and used the name of Art Rivers. He told anyone that would listen that he just returned from Cuba, where he had been on assignment as a foreign correspondent. Once interrogated, he admitted the child was his 14-month-old daughter, Heather, but he had not killed her. She had a tongue abnormality, and he placed her on her back after eating. She suffocated accidentally. Later, it was determined she had some type of retardation or Down syndrome. He interred her, pretending it was a pet dog. It wasn't only Maryland authorities who questioned him, but California and Nevada waited their turn to ask him about certain cases. One involved the disappearance of Pearl Leda Putney, 72, a wealthy widow who dropped from sight after she was last seen with Motherwell in Las Vegas the summer before. She drove out there with him from Washington, D.C., on what she called a last fling. He told police they parted ways in Las Vegas, and he left her there to marry another man. According to him, he acted only as her chauffeur. Police had no proof to dispute this claim. In February 1959, Motherwell was freed by the grand jury because there was insufficient evidence to indict him on the charge of murdering his daughter. The cause of her death could not be ascertained. However, the police bided their time and continued their investigation. In August of the same year, Alma Freeman, who was hunting pine cones with her granddaughter, stumbled upon parched bones in Turner Canyon at the foothills of the Sierras. They were identified through dental work as belonging to Pearl Putney. This is Pearl Putney's story. Pearl didn't randomly pick a cross-country trip as her last fling. She frequently crossed the country on extended trips for many years, accompanied by her husband, Dr. Albert Putney, who died in 1929. He was a member of the State Department, and the couple were well known in Washington diplomatic circles. She lived for many years at an apartment on Porter Street with her mother, Ida Meek de Bruja. Her only other relative was a half-brother, Castro Meek de Bruja, who lived in Illinois. Motherwell and Pearl met in 1949 when he moved into the same apartment building. Mrs. Putney vanished on August 15, 1958, when she was staying at the Townhouse Motel in Maryville, California. This was 90 miles from where her skeletal remains were found. The widow was reported to be carrying $50,000 at the time, most of it from the sale of several of her properties. In mid-September, the Washington Metropolitan Police opened a missing persons report on Mrs. Putney. It was almost a year later that the skeletal remains were found in the forest. This was what police had been waiting for. At that point, the police didn't know where Motherwell was, and California issued a warrant for his arrest. Within a few days, the FBI joined the search, and on August 5, 1959, they caught up to him. He was in Atlanta and about to board a plane for Cleveland. He was using the name Craig Dubar. He went to jail under a $50,000 bond. His wife engaged attorneys for him. However, by mid-September, he was extradited to California to face charges of murdering Pearl Putney. Once there, he pled innocent to the charge. A grand jury deliberated only 5 minutes and turned in a unanimous vote to prosecute him. The trial was held in Downeyville, California, a Sierra gold mining town. The jail stood in the shadow of the old gallows where vigilantes used to hang horse thieves. The jury consisted of 9 women and 3 men. Now, this is the story of Dorothy Summers, the first wife. In 1940, Motherwell married his first wife, Dorothy, and in the next 5 years they had 3 children, Gail, Janice, and Richard. By the time of his divorce from Dorothy in 1945, he was already using the alias of Motherwell, which was his mother's maiden name. During the hearing, Dorothy sobbed on the witness stand, describing that he had tried to kill her and their 2 daughters by dosing her unconscious with sleeping pills and turning on the gas jets in their Washington, D.C. apartment. Later that year, she claimed he tried to drown her and the girls at Lake Milton, near Washington. While rowing on the lake, he hit her on the head with a pipe and tipped over the boat in an attempt to do away with them. They were rescued by 3 teenage Boy Scouts. She implied Motherwell strangled or suffocated their infant son Richard, who was only a month old, when he died in 1945. They divorced shortly afterward. During the time he was married to Dorothy, he would go on to be arrested several times for different crimes. First, he was arraigned before the United States Commissioner in Minneapolis on a charge of illegally wearing a military discharge button. He posed as a Navy commander and an industrial relations advisor to Chiang Kai-shek. He was arrested by the FBI after he offered a Minneapolis man a job in China as a public speaking instructor for the Chinese government in exchange for a $27 bill for fixing a typewriter. It was during these years he made the acquaintance of his neighbor, Pearl Putney. By 1949, he had divorced, remarried, and moved away from Washington, D.C. His new wife, Sarah McClurkin, was a librarian. In 1953, their daughter, Heather, was born, and she had Down syndrome. The couple placed a child in a Maryland home for retarded children. Less than a year after Heather's birth, Sarah was found floating face up in the bathtub of their Clydesdale Place apartment in Washington on November 8, 1953. Her death was ruled accidental. By 1955, Motherwell added the title of captain to his alias. He was arrested and pled guilty to 12 counts of a 14-count indictment. His plea included falsely assumed and pretended to be an officer, wearing the uniform of a captain in the United States Navy, wearing the Navy Cross, the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit Award, among other military medals. For this, he was placed on a 2-year probation. Part of his sentence mandated he submit himself for psychiatric treatment. Motherwell passed himself off as a Scottish lord and became a member and elder of his church where President Eisenhower attended. In 1956, he married Josephine Smeraldo. He explained his long absences from home by saying he worked as a spy for the government on secret missions. During this time, he renewed his friendship with Pearl Putney. It was at this point that Motherwell's web of lies started to unravel, and the full depth of his crimes came to light, and it turned out he was much worse than a lying con man who impersonated military personnel. Following is Marie Cawley's story. Marie Cawley testified in October 1957 Motherwell had told her he was divorcing his wife Josephine and planned to marry her. They went on a trip to Florida and rented an apartment there. He told her that because of his secret government work, he needed bodyguards, one of whom was named the Dagger. Oh, this is great. Shortly after arriving in Florida, he disappeared, and then she received a telegram signed by the Dagger, saying that Motherwell was killed and his cremated ashes were scattered in the Everglades. She returned to her home in Roanoke, Virginia, and 2 weeks later Motherwell paid her a visit, saying the telegram was a mistake. The person killed was his twin brother. Now plans had changed, and they had to go out west for the divorce since the laws in Florida could not accommodate his plans. Their ultimate destination was Reno so he could secure the divorce. They took Highway 40 to Donner Summit, but had to turn back because of snow. They tried another route through Marysville, California, and took the Feather River Canyon route. They stopped the automobile near a large cliff so they could look over the side of the canyon. She didn't go near the edge and noticed the ground was slippery and wet. Motherwell told her there was no danger, but she refused. The promised divorce from his wife or his marriage to Marie Cawley never took place, and she never saw him again after they returned to Virginia. This is Evelyn Doherty's story. One of those brought in to testify was Evelyn Doherty. She met Motherwell on board a flight from Miami to Cleveland on October 9, 1958. He told her his name was Arthur Rivers, and he was a correspondent for the United Press en route to cover a big news story. He embellished the lie by claiming he had served in the military and had been a prisoner of war in Korea. In November, he returned to Cleveland and proposed marriage. He told her he had no wife or children. As an engagement present, he gave her a garnet necklace, saying it belonged to his deceased grandmother. He then took a cross-country trip with his fiancée, ending up in Laguna Beach, California. He then gave her another gift of 3 cameos. He told her he was leaving for the Orient on a mission and would marry her as soon as he returned. He borrowed $2,000 from her supposedly to pay his income tax. He left her in Laguna Beach, and this was the last time she saw him. All the pieces of jewelry were later found to belong to Pearl Putney. The prosecutor told the jurist that during those days when Motherwell reacquainted himself with Pearl Putney among her friends, she introduced him as Dr. Motherwell, a retired naval officer who was involved in some highly secret work for the government. In early 1958, she was taking lessons at Arthur Murray's studio and told her instructor she was, quote, contemplating marrying a man who was a doctor and a very brilliant man, but who was considerably younger than she, end quote. Unbeknownst to Pearl Putney, he had been married to Josephine, his third wife, for 2 years. In June 1958, Mrs. Putney met her brother in New York. She told her sister-in-law that Josephine was being unfaithful and that Motherwell was divorcing her, and that the FBI was getting the information on the wife to assist in the divorce. Mrs. de Bruja, or her sister-in-law, told her it was ridiculous to think the FBI would involve themselves in marital troubles. Mrs. Putney clammed up, and she made no further mention of Motherwell. Then the prosecutor introduced items found in Motherwell's possession. There were Social Security cards, driver's license, and other documents using the alias of Alan Dunbar Foster or Alan Michael Dunbar. It was not only IDs, but resumes that were part of the cache. Dunbar reflected as the owner of a large steel mill in Cuba that had been taken over by Fidel Castro. Motherwell was the last to testify, and in his closing argument, the prosecutor told the jury, "We know she believed he was going to divorce his wife Josephine and marry her. Mrs. Putney belonged to a large sorority of women who were taken in by this psychopath." And this is Heather's story. Once the warrant was issued for Motherwell's arrest in January 1959, the police started to investigate what happened to Heather. They contacted Sarah's family in Alabama, her aunt and uncle A.R. Taylor and his wife. Hattie answered their inquiries. The Taylors said Heather was placed in a home run by Ella Hinkson in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Detectives found Mrs. Hinkson and interviewed her. She said Mr. Motherwell came and picked up his daughter on June 19, 1954. He told her he was moving to Tallahassee where his parents lived and would find a place for her there. Because of the secret missions he undertook for the government, he traveled quite a bit. This, of course, was all lies. Mrs. Hinkson gave him special instructions when feeding Heather and precautions to be taken so she would not choke on her food and strangle. She saw neither of them again. The detectives then went to where Motherwell was living at the time. A former tenant said that Motherwell talked about the combat dog which saved his life during the Korean War. Co-workers at a construction company recalled where he would brag about knowing E. Dwight McCain, a renowned estate owner. Authorities had interviewed Mr. McCain, who told them he knew Motherwell from church, but they actually met the first time when he came to his farm. McCain was a dog breeder and loved animals. Motherwell told him his beloved dog had died and that he wanted to bury it in a small cemetery he had on the grounds. He granted Motherwell permission and watched when he carried a small wooden box which he buried in the cemetery. According to McCain, he returned a number of times, sometimes with a woman, to visit the grave. The day Motherwell buried the small coffin was June 20th, 1954, the day after he took his daughter from the care of Mrs. Hinkson. Those hunting him knew he had no military background. They obtained permission to dig up the grave, and with deep regret but little surprise, they found the badly decomposed remains of a baby girl inside. All the items Mrs. Hinkson had sent with the child were there as well. The Taylors told detectives that shortly after taking Heather, he told them he needed $300 to place her in an institution in Tallahassee. They gave him the money, but unbeknownst to them, Heather was dead and buried in a pet cemetery. The prosecuting attorney subpoenaed Janice Hampton, a clerk in the Western Union office in San Francisco. She testified that on August 6, 1958, she sent a telegram to Mrs. Putney's half-brother, Castro de Bruja, at Winnetka, Illinois. The telegram said that she, Pearl Putney, was flying to Mexico to get married. The one placing the telegram was Motherwell. She asked him if he was the groom, and he said no, he was sending it on behalf of his aunt. During the proceedings, Motherwell said he knew Pearl Putney for about 10 years, and that she became a tippler who got into auto accidents and used a great deal of medicine. He called her, quote, a little old lady with sex on her mind, end quote. After leaving Washington, D.C., they went to Florida. In Sarasota, she withdrew $13,000 cash from a bank account. From there, they headed to Georgia and North Carolina before heading westward. They registered using different names, including Dr. and Mrs. Putney or Dr. and Mrs. Motherwell. Along the way, Pearl sent postcards out. However, she failed to tell her network of friends that she traveled only with Motherwell. She referred to her journey as being with a group of friends. They arrived in Las Vegas, Nevada on August 4th, 1958. During the trial, authorities found the woman in Sarasota, Florida, who testified Pearl introduced Motherwell as her fiancé. Motherwell told a story about what happened when they arrived in Marysville. He went to dinner alone, and when he returned to the room, he found she was tipsy. He stated, quote, she wanted me to kiss her. She disrobed partially, made a few vulgar statements, told me I was being paid enough to know she was a woman alive, that I wasn't such an angel that I didn't know she was a woman, end quote. According to him, after this, he drove her back to Las Vegas and they parted ways. She told him she was marrying a South American diplomat. During cross-examination, the prosecutor took pains to show how callous Motherwell truly was. He told the jury that less than 2 weeks after the death of his second wife, he applied for a new apartment with his wife, Sally. Motherwell denied this and asked for proof. A lease was produced, filled out in his handwriting. Then the attorney asked him about an affidavit he signed stating that he changed his name because he was raised by an aunt. This contradicted testimony Motherwell had already given, where he described growing up in Ohio with both of his parents. He was born Frank Eugene Caventer and legally changed his name to Larry Lord Motherwell on July 10, 1952. On March 15, 1960, the jury convicted Motherwell of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. With the shadow of the gas chamber looming, prosecutors were now going to try to prove he murdered his second wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Heather. He was kept on suicide watch at the county jail until being transferred to San Quentin. His wife Josephine divorced him in 1962. Eventually, Motherwell's charge was changed from first-degree murder to second-degree murder, and in December 1961, he was resentenced to an indeterminate 5-year term to life term. Indeterminate 5-year term to life term. Wow. In prison, he became a cabinet maker and behaved well. However, he was denied parole 3 times. On February 28, 1966, he dropped dead from a heart attack while he served his sentence at San Quentin. He was 49 years old. Neither his parents nor any other relatives came to take custody of the body, and he was cremated at Mount Tamalpais Cemetery. One has to wonder how many women Motherwell victimized beyond telling outlandish stories and promising them marriage. In the book Call of Duty, My Life Before, During, and After the Band of Brothers, written by Lynn Compton, who prosecuted Motherwell, a passage reads, quote, "Although the crimes could not be proved, Maryland police have stated that Motherwell confessed to them that he killed 7 women altogether, including his infant daughter, Heather. Motherwell was particularly remorseful about his daughter because he had buried her alive." End quote. The police never recovered any of the cash or securities Motherwell stole from Mrs. Putney before and after her murder. It seemed that Motherwell's parents were not destined to receive joy from their children, and outlived all 3 of them. Their second child, a daughter born in 1920, was premature and died at birth. Motherwell's younger brother, Jack, died in 1939 at the age of 15. He lived at the Polk State School since he was feeble-minded, which was the term used in those days. So this guy was lying just for the sake of lying and what he did with his daughter. And I think that they weren't able to prove it, but they're pretty sure that his wife Sarah, which was the mother of Heather, he probably killed her. You know, and that story that she was found in the bathtub, let me tell you, he dropped dead. But yeah, he turned psychopath with a capital P. Okay, next story out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories is titled The Murder That Never Happened. It was once a showplace home in Laurel Canyon, but only ashes were left of the 14-room house. Before its destruction on July 31st, 1928, it was the scene of wild parties, a gun battle, an explosion, and ultimately a fire. In the early morning hours of August 1st, 1928, hungry orange flames licked the starlit sky as firemen and an amateur bucket brigade fought to put out a fire that engulfed an unoccupied mansion on Lookout Mountain near Laurel Canyon. The house, located at 230 North Canyon Road, sat about a mile off Horseshoe Drive and was considered one of the finest homes in the area. 3 explosions were heard before the blaze erupted, and fire investigators entertained the theory that arson gutted the home. The last owner on record was Henry W. White, once a wealthy real estate dealer and Hollywood promoter. He built the 14-bedroom house only 4 years before. No expense had been spared, including a large pool in the middle. Henry White moved to 2133 Stanley Drive after he lost the house in foreclosure. At that time, he was running the Film Fam Photo Company on Sunset Boulevard. 2 weeks before the fire, he visited the mansion, the only time he had done this in several months. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of the fire, he said he met a fellow real estate investor and that he didn't return to his home until 4 a.m. on August 1st. Once the fire was extinguished, firemen searched the ruins of what the newspaper called the Mystery House for any signs of bodies, since neighbors told them there had been a party going on before flames and smoke filled the canyon. Later, 2 Boy Scouts recounted how they visited the property some weeks before and saw sticks of dynamite and caps stored in the garage, located under the structure. Henry White confirmed this information, saying he bought it for the purpose of blasting out a new road leading from the main highway to his home. Since the gas and electricity had been cut off, it was believed the revelers had brought candles with them, and one of them turned over and caused the blaze. This would explain why neighbors heard what they thought were gunshots. There was also a report of 2 men fighting high on a cliff where one wrong step would plunge them down 80 feet. Many of the neighbors were convinced the murder had been committed. However, nothing came of it, neither the reason for the fire, whether accidental or arson, or who ran from the house before it erupted in flames. What was left of the mystery house sat forgotten for months until June 8, 1929, when Frank Ryder, a lineman for the Southern California Edison Company, arrived at 230 North Canyon Road. He found only a charred ruin. He was stringing a power line when he saw animals poking around what he thought was a large bone. He pulled it from the ground and dug further only to find an axe-battered skull. The size of the skull and a number of hairpins found by the bones indicated it possibly belonged to a woman. It was theorized she was killed with an axe. The head which was found close by. There was also depression in the skull that fit the blunt end of the instrument. A superficial examination indicated she was not more than 20 years old. The lower jaw bone was missing as well as the teeth in the upper part of the mouth. This time police went around and interviewed the neighbors. They all described in one form or another the same thing: orgies, all-night parties, and women occasionally screaming. The all-night parties had been playing out for weeks inside the deserted house. The night of the fire, a fusillade of shots boomed through the hills. Police found bullet holes in the walls still standing. When asked, Henry White denied that anyone would hold drinking orgies in the property since it had been vandalized after he vacated it. He also explained the bullet holes, saying he'd fired some shots in the house one night in jest. A neighbor described how from her bedroom window she had a good view of the house, and the moon was bright that night of the fire. She saw two men run from the house after the sound of gunfire. It was strange because they appeared to be fighting, and they took separate routes down the canyon trails. When she heard the roar of a crash, then she heard the roar of a car as the motor was gunned, and it barreled down Laurel Canyon Road. As it departed, flames shot into the air from the garage of the house. Police reenacted her story and found she could have plainly seen all she said she did. 2 weeks before the discovery of the skull, a Hollywood policeman looking for vagrants found the house unlocked. It was empty of furniture except in one room where he thought the parties were held because there was a bed and several chairs. Fire investigators later suspected that gasoline was poured throughout the house, which is why it incinerated so quickly. Another neighbor, who lived 50 yards over the hill in Horseshoe Canyon, said that many nights the raucous parties woke up his family. He corroborated reports of hearing women scream. The police now faced reviewing a list of more than 180 missing girls to find out if the skull belonged to one of them. Sifting through the ashes, police found bones, charred clothing, and other evidence to support a murder investigation. However, a medical report was issued that opined that the upper portion of the skull was planted and appeared to be defleshed. No part of it had been charred by the fire. But despite these findings, more bones were found, as well as women's underwear, jewelry, and clothing. High above the ruins of the house, a laborer started working on a natural stone fireplace and found several bones, a diamond ring set with 2 emeralds, 2 discharged .32 caliber shells, and some vials believed to have contained narcotics. There was also a woman's glove and a thermometer with Ottawa Tubercular Colony 38651 printed on it. On a pencil was printed the name Carol H. Dunning. A picture of a popular actress, which the newspapers did not name, was found ripped across the center with the name of the person to whom she dedicated it torn away. 15 yards from the house, in a little ravine, police found a blood-stained yellow couch cover. The spot appeared to be a dump site used by those who frequented the house during the time it was allegedly empty. Hundreds of empty whiskey and gin bottles littered the area. The discovery bore out the neighbor's story about the wild parties. The police believe those who used the house as a rendezvous point were instructed where to find it, since it was hidden by shrubbery on an isolated canyon trail. Then from one day to the next, police changed their mind and branded the findings of the skull a hoax, placed there by neighbors, and the bones belonged to animals. They explained their decision to end the investigation based on their theory that Henry White, who entertained extensively, had gained the enmity of his neighbors, and they planted the skull in the house to scare him away. He recently tried to purchase another house in the area, and owners of the surrounding properties banded together and refused to sell to him. However, from the beginning, the police seemed to have bungled any type of effort to discover if indeed someone had been killed. The newspapers noted that the night of the fire, police were called to the scene, especially after the sound of gunfire. However, they only sent 2 officers that didn't even turn over a spadeful of ashes. If this had been done, authorities could confirm if the skull had been in the ruins on that date, or perhaps even stumbled across a body. No further inquiries were made despite the discovery of the trash heap with a bloody couch cover and hundreds of empty liquor bottles. But indeed the skull was planted, how could anyone guarantee it would be found since it was buried? However, this was not the last time Henry White found himself involved in a fire-related incident. Only a month later, in July 1929, a fire of undetermined origin burned 5 acres, menacing homes in the vicinity of Laurel Canyon. According to neighbors, laborers working on Henry White's house on Stanley Drive were seen smoking around a rubbish pile accumulated from the renovations they were working on. 2 months later, in August 1929, 200 cases of contraband scotch and bourbon valued at $20,000 were captured by police when a truck was stopped in Laurel Canyon. No doubt skullduggery was afoot in this area. If a woman was killed on the night of July 31st, 1928, who she was and what happened to her remained unknown. Her killer might have been one of those men who drove off into the night as flames erupted behind him. Perhaps somebody owed Henry White a big favor, and he called it in, and the mystery mansion on North Canyon Road kept it secret. The Laurel Canyon, Benedict Canyon area of Los Angeles, California, is where a lot of strange deaths have occurred, and extremely violent murders took place. There was the Wonderland murders of 1981. In 1924, Will Rothschild, 87, died from heart complications and smoke inhalation. It was presumed he burned alive in his own home in Laurel Canyon, and one has to wonder what really happened there. It turned out the man who died in the fire was named William Kaufman, and he changed his name to William de Rothschild in 1985. To add to the mystery, when the press contacted Richard Kaufman about his estranged brother, he commented, "I thought he had passed away 40 years ago. Last contact I had with him was a telephone call. It was kind of odd. It seemed like he had something to tell me. He didn't. And when I never heard from him again, I kind of presumed that maybe he had an illness. He didn't want to talk about it and just quietly passed away. I don't know how he made his money." Despite not belonging to the famous family, none could understand where Will Rothschild's money came from. He owned multiple properties and dozens of luxury vehicles and elevators in his garage. He bought the house in Laurel Canyon in 1972, and public records reflect that in 1999 he married Margot Merkin, whose father established Budget Rent-A-Car. In the intervening years between 1928 and present day, many strange and unexplained events have taken place there. Have you noticed in the prior story, this guy changed his name from Caventer to Motherwell? This gentleman, and it's never explained. He just chooses to call himself a de Rothschild, and nobody knows where he got his money from. Very weird, very weird. And by the way, I read a little bit more into it. Everybody thinks, was this maybe he was really a de Rothschild, illegitimate, a fling, and the remaining brother, the one that was still alive, said, "No, he's my brother." In other words, there's no question here about our parentage. He's not a de Rothschild. Very weird. But that thing about, what is it? A rose by any other name smelled just as sweet. Well, apparently these people don't think that. All right, this story is out of The Guardian. It's titled, "Is He Still Alive? The Mystery of D.B. Cooper, the Hijacker Who Disappeared." On the evening of November 24th, 1971, Florence Schaffner, a flight attendant on Northwest Orient flight heading to Seattle, Washington from Portland, Oregon, was handed a note by a male passenger seated at the back of the plane. Schaffner assumed the note was a phone number. This wasn't the first time a passenger had hit on her, so she stowed in her purse without reading it. The man leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner read it. "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." She complied. The man was wearing a suit and had a dark complexion. His eyes were hidden by sunglasses. Schaffner watched as he opened his suitcase, revealing 4 cylindrical sticks connected to a wire and battery. It certainly looked like a bomb. He then told Schaffner his demands. The passengers were to remain seated while the plane refueled in Seattle. When he was handed $200,000, equivalent to about $1.6 million today, and 4 parachutes, they would be released. When the passengers alighted in Seattle, they had no idea they had just flown on a hijacked plane. The ground crew obeyed the hijacker's wishes and refueled the plane, while the authorities gave the cash and parachutes to the air crew. The man then ordered the pilots to take off, flying low and slow with the flaps down towards Mexico. At some point over Washington, the crew felt their ears pop when the pressure in the cabin dropped. Someone had lowered the air stair at the rear of the plane. The man had leapt into the night and vanished, never to be found. The only trace he left behind was a clip-on tie, a tie clip, and the name written on his ticket, Dan Cooper, which was misprinted in contemporaneous news reports as D.B. Cooper. The name stuck and a legend was born. No one knows who Cooper was or is. Not three-letter spooks or an army of amateur sleuths. The case is on ice, but the tale remains captivating. Leaving aside the audacity of the stunt, several questions persist. Was Cooper never found because he didn't survive the jump? The authorities recorded the serial numbers of the bills handed to Cooper, but they never showed up, except for about $5,800 discovered in a state of disintegration on the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, in February 1980. Who was Cooper? A former paratrooper or a chancer? Where was he from? The answers to these questions seem madly out of reach. I understand how greyhounds feel about mechanical rabbits. Fly too close to this mystery and it sucks you into its orbit. Jeffrey Gray, who wrote the 2011 book Skyjack: The Hunt for D.B. Cooper, refers to this as the Cooper curse. The podcaster Darren Schaefer has the curse too. He got it after reading Skyjack and felt compelled to start a podcast dedicated to the mystery with Russell Colbert in 2018. Schaefer was originally going to call it the D.B. Cooper Podcast, but ultimately landed on the Cooper Vortex, after learning how fellow Cooper anoraks described the case. Schaefer explains that he has promised a few times over the years to abandon Cooper, but like Michael's Corleone in The Godfather, just when he thinks he is out, he gets pulled back in. The D.B. Cooper story is like the best book I've ever read in my whole life, but I'm missing the first and last chapters of the book. I only have the middle. There is no D.B. Cooper story before the hijacking, and there really isn't none after. He only exists for about 5 hours. There are many theories about Cooper's identity. The name itself is intriguing. Dan Cooper is a protagonist in a long-running Franco-Belgian comic book series, Les Aventures de Dan Cooper. The comic star heroic test pilot in the Canadian Air Force. Think Tintin meets Buck Rogers. Some of the plots share similarities with the hijacking, including parachuting from a plane and delivering a ransom in a knapsack. Coincidences? Or something more? If you robbed a train and then escaped on a skateboard, and your ticket was under the name Tony Hawk, is that a coincidence? Asked Schaefer. Was a hijacker inspired by the comics? The series was not well known outside the Francophone world. Perhaps he was Canadian. If so, that would narrow the search to fewer than 2.9 million people, roughly the number of French-Canadian males in 1971. What about the money? Always follow the money, they say, only the money leads nowhere. In more than 50 years, not a single bill from the ransom has appeared in circulation, despite the notes' serial numbers being shared with banks across the U.S. The money found in 1980 brought investigators no closer to the truth. The simplest explanation for what became of Cooper is that he failed to land safely. His body and loot were lost to the elements and the passage of time. This was the prevailing wisdom among the original FBI investigators. Cooper was wearing a suit and dress shoes and jumped into thick clouds and heavy rain on a freezing night above the Washington wilderness. Not the best attire for parachuting or the hike he would have to make upon landing. Cooper instructed the pilots to fly towards Mexico, but he had no way of knowing the exact flight path they were taking due to the dense cloud cover. The landscape of the Pacific Northwest is wildly diverse. Cooper could have plummeted into a crag, or a mountain, plunged into a lake, or crashed into a ravine just as easily as alighted softly on flat agricultural land. But Marty Andrade is not convinced Cooper is dead. The Minnesota author has been following the Cooper mystery for more than a decade. In his book about the case, he argues that the statistics on parachuting survival rates favor Cooper. Importantly, he doesn't believe Cooper jumped over wilderness. He probably jumped much closer to a town called Battle's Ground, Washington, Andrade says. Now, there are a lot of trees and stuff, but it is well-developed agricultural land, fairly flat compared with the Cascades, the mountain range that runs from southern British Columbia in Canada to northern California in the U.S. If you look at the timing of where the aircraft was, he may have landed within a mile or two of this town. Karen Humes, a professor at the University of Idaho's Department of Earth and Spatial Sciences, agrees. With the help of her students, Humes created an interactive map of Cooper's probable flight path and determined that he most likely parachuted over farmland. It's a complete myth that it was a wilderness, she says. We know it well enough to be confident that he jumped somewhere between Battleground, which is a very small town just north of Vancouver, Washington, and just barely south of the Columbia River. So we're talking the suburbs of Vancouver, and the terrain is pretty flat. Whether or not he survived the jump is probably moot at this point. Cooper was thought to be about 40. If his behavior on the flight provides a window into his lifestyle, then he was a heavy smoker and prone to taking absurd risks. As much, he is unlikely still to be alive. I accept the fact that we probably will never know. That's fine with me, says Andrade. The joy it takes from this mystery is the community around it. It's nice to be able to sit down and then just randomly start talking about why Cooper chose a felt tip pen for his ransom note, he says. Andrade recalls the rabbit hole he went down when he learned that forensic analysts have found traces of metal particles on Cooper's discarded tie. Andrade said the particles are found in makeup, which he discovered while poring over piles of research paper. I'm reading all these papers and I'm like, what am I doing? Andrade, Humes, and Schaefer have made many friends in this space, but things can get intense online, with people wrapping up their self-esteem in pet theories. Also, the community is a bit of a boys' club. I'm almost unique, says Pat Boland, over the phone from a cruise liner heading to the Portuguese coast. Along with Humes, Boland is one of the few women investigating D.B. Cooper. At 64, she is old enough to remember the hijacking being reported. But she says she got drawn into the vortex by the rumors swirling around the denouement of the TV series Mad Men. As the finale approached in 2015, it was posited that the series protagonist, Don Draper, would turn out to be Cooper, which of course did not happen. It was possibly a publicity stunt, but I started thinking about it again and I just fell in head first. Boland has put together groups of researchers and scientists to try to convince the FBI to let them test Cooper's parachute for DNA. Cooper tore up one of the parachutes he was given to create a makeshift bag for the ransom and left parts of it behind. This would be at no expense to the taxpayer, as we have volunteers who are quite used to handling this type of evidence. Back in 1971, this type of testing didn't even exist, she says. The FBI has refused, but Boland remains hopeful that may change. The Cooper case fits neatly into the true crime genre, which is most popular among women. So why is Boland an outlier? I think women tend to want to explain, for instance, the Zodiac killer or some horrible case because they put themselves in the place of the victims. She says men, on the other hand, identify with Cooper because his heist could have been written by Ian Fleming. I think a lot of men would love to get an aeroplane and jump out with way over $1 million and disappear to Mexico with a margarita in their hand. The first sip from my drink makes the hair on my neck stand up. A shiver snakes down my spine. It's a bourbon and soda, the same cocktail Cooper sipped mid-flight, but here it's called a skyjack. I'm in D.B. Cooper's Manhattan dive bar dedicated to the hijacking. The bar was opened 6 months ago by the Irishman Sharon Williams and two of his friends. Not wanting to be just another banal Irish pub, Celtic surnames, green snakes, and shamrocks, they came up with a name that would stand out. As well as serving themed cocktails, the Flight 305 mixes pear vodka with pear nectar, blackberry, and lemon juice. The pub is decorated with Cooper-inspired photos, drawings, newspaper clippings, and t-shirts. We're running low on stuff at the minute, Willis says as he gives me a tour. These are the ones we did for St. Patrick's Day, he continues, showing me a stack of green t-shirts. He leads me to the bar's piece de resistance, a giant framed poster illustrating the story of the hijacking. A Cooper convention takes place every year in Portland, Oregon. Willis is in touch with the organizers and says he hopes to host an event. Do you see him as a hero? I ask Willis as he pours me another skyjack. I don't really know how to answer that, Willis says. He didn't hurt anyone, I guess. But I wouldn't advocate for any kind of air piracy. I suppose it took balls to do what he did, but I wouldn't be advocating for any copycats. Andrade is more emphatic. He was definitely a crook, he says. I don't make him a Robin Hood character. He definitely deserved to get caught. He got people killed. Andrade is referring to the copycats who hijacked planes in the aftermath, some of who died in their attempts. And he destroyed lives, not intentionally, but that was the end result. There were consequences to this that were serious and meaningful. It's not a victimless crime. Poland agrees. All the women I've spoken to about it, they also think he's a criminal. Because I think they tend to really sympathize with the air stewardesses. Cooper drew two flight attendants into his orbit on Flight 305. After Schaffner took his note and instructions to the cockpit, Tina Mucklow sat with Cooper for the remainder of the flight and acted as a liaison between him and the rest of the crew. It was Mucklow who received the ransom. She was the only flight attendant on board when the flight left for Mexico. Mucklow probably didn't need anyone's sympathy. I just moved on. Maybe that's part of being young and resilient, but it was also part of what we trained for. That was part of what our job was, she told Rolling Stones in 2021. The only trouble she has is batting away the hordes of amateur Colombos who pursue her for interviews. Schaefer has a different view. I want to know the answers so badly. I would do anything if somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I have all the secrets and I'll tell you, but you can never tell anyone else." I would 1000% say, "Yes, absolutely, tell me what happened so I can know." We live in an era of information overload. Facts flow like water and are just as difficult to control. It is encouraging that there are still some mysteries left in the world where all the maps are charted. If Schaefer found Cooper, there would be no need for his podcasts, no need for Andrade to discuss the finer details of felt tip pens with his friends, no more conventions to attend, no more novelty bars. Now knowing seems the whole point of this mystery. Who is D.B. Cooper, whomever you want him to be? Let me tell you, I think that's very interesting. And again, I don't see why the FBI doesn't allow them to test the DNA. Might as well. I mean, let's face it, at this point, that guy's probably dead. I mean, if he didn't die then, he's probably dead. They should do that. But again, like what they stated, then all these people that in the orbit of this D.B. Cooper mystery, that's it. The mystery is done. But I'm sure something else would sprout in the wake of that. So anyway, I hope you like this set of stories from Eerie News, and I will be back very, very soon with more information about the world of the weird. Till next time.